But thank you to those who have joined us promptly for this webinar today. Welcome, where we're going to talk to you about a new partnership between AirPlus and Coupa and how we're working together to help businesses simplify their business spending. So we're really pleased that you could take the time to join us today. Just run through some high-level agenda items that we're going to cover today. So first of all, we're going to do a quick round of introductions for your speakers. We're also going to give some insights into virtual cards, what they are. Appreciate not everyone will have a full level of knowledge on what virtual cards actually are, and some insights as to what we see in terms of the trajectory and adoption of virtual cards globally at the moment. We'll then double click into the partnership between AirPlus and Coupa, what that actually means from an integration standpoint and the benefits that organizations can achieve by leveraging it. And then, you know, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then the story really will come alive when we dive into the actual live demo. And you can see the integration in action, which is always super useful. And we'll then have time for Q&A at the end. So if anyone does have any questions as we go through the session today, please feel free to put them on the Q&A tab within Zoom, and we'll answer those questions for you at the end. We'll try and leave about 10 minutes or so towards the end of the session to answer your burning questions. Now, if we don't happen to get to answer those questions today, when we do provide everyone with a copy of the recording of the session, we will also provide an FAQ answering those questions that we don't get a chance to get to. So thanks for that. And before we move on, Krista, do you want to provide those that are attending at the moment just some insights as to what they'll get if they're still on the session at the end?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Darren, and thanks to AirPlus for joining us today. We're super excited about this webinar. I wanted just to let, I know it was in the invite, so anyone who attends and stays for the entire event, you'll be receiving a link from me from Sendoso, and you'll receive a gift card for coffee or Danish donut, depending on where you live in the world. So thank you so much. And the on-demand version will also be available tomorrow as well. So have a great webinar, and thanks so much for attending.
Excellent. Thanks, Krista. And if anyone is having any technical issues as we go through the webinar, please do direct message Krista, and she'll help you out in the background as we run through the session today.
Yep. Happy to help. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Krista. So let's kickstart with a quick round of introductions. So my name's Darren Blair. I'm responsible for Coupa Pay partnerships at Coupa. I've been with Coupa almost a year now, and my background is really focused around helping businesses implement commercial card-based solutions, and in more recent years, very much focused on virtual card technology. And I have the pleasure of managing the relationship globally with our friends at AirPlus. I'll just hand it over to my colleague, Mark, who will give a quick intro on his side. Do you want to come off mute, Mark?
There you go.
Technology.
Thanks, Darren.
You're doing the demo as well, right?
Yes, I am indeed. So yeah, Mark Miles, I'm the Senior Value Solutions Consultant for our Coupa Pay and Treasury product supporting North EMEA. So that's the UK and sort of Nordics. And yes, I will be presenting our Coupa Pay platform to you guys today, which I'm looking forward to doing. So yeah, thank you for having me.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Looking forward to that. And over to you, Marcus.
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, well, my name is Marcus Dorsch. I've been working for AirPlus for more than 11 years now. And I was always responsible for consulting customers when it comes to different means of payment within procurement. I'm based in Germany and very happy to be here in this webinar with our friends from Coupa, and excited about that.
Excellent. Thanks, Marcus. And a special thanks to you and also to your family for allowing you to join while you're on vacation at the moment. Really appreciate that total dedication for the partnership. So we'll let you get back to your family vacation in about 52 minutes or so. So hold on tight. Thank you. Okay, so look, as individuals, as consumers, we're all very familiar with using card-based products, traditional plastic-based products, either from a credit or a debit perspective. Now, really, in terms of the card number, the card verification value, and the expiry date, that's really where the form factor kind of moves away as we move into B2B virtual card payments. So where we see, organizations adopting virtual cards, obviously the form's in the name, so there is no plastic being produced, there is no physical form, but these cards are actually dynamically created either for an individual purchase or for an individual purpose. So it could be one transaction, but in what we're seeing more and more is it could be a card that's created for one particular supplier for multiple invoices that are being charged against that card. Now, the benefit here is the card is being created for a specific value that's pre-approved. So that's very, very important. So it's not an open to buy limit that can be used by anyone or for anything. It is very much preset within the Coupa platform. Now, there are multiple different benefits that these card-based products provide, but it will vary depending on your specific organization. And as you'll see when we run through the demo, the specific use case that you are looking to actually adopt and leverage this type of technology. The benefit is to you as an organization that you can sit down with the team at Coupa and also with the team at AirPlus to actually run through and work through the actual business case that will tell you exactly what the key benefits would be to you as an organization. We know from research that from the likes of Accenture, where businesses that do actually adopt virtual card technology do experience over 80% in cost reduction, and actually over 70% of them are actually able to drive key efficiencies within their organization by adding this type of payment technology to their broader payment strategy, because we do appreciate that virtual cards are not a payment tool that can be used or should be used for everything, but they should certainly be used to complement your broader payment capabilities. So from an insights perspective, what we're seeing, for example, in the US, where virtual cards are very prevalent, we're seeing double-digit growth year on year from organizations that are adopting this, both from a travel and from a B2B payments perspective. And you can see over the coming few years that actually virtual cards are going to make up the vast majority of the types of transactions that businesses are actually experiencing. And this is because more and more virtual card technology is being embedded into platforms, and speaks volumes when you can see that the AirPlus card technology capability is now plugged directly into the Coupa business spend management platform. Now, interestingly, over the years, some of the challenges has been, organizations are looking to deploy virtual cards, but the supplier acceptance has often been tagged as potentially being an issue. And what we are seeing is, again, double-digit growth over the years for organizations, AP files where their supplier base are actually putting their hand up to say they are willing to accept virtual card. Now you can see with increased cost of capital, inflation through the roof, you can see why suppliers are actually turning around to say, well, actually, when they do the calculation, even though there is a merchant discount rate for accepting a card-based product, there are some key benefits. And when you do the calculation, often it can be a really cost-effective way to accept and speed up your payables. Now, for those organizations that are leveraging virtual cards that are embedded into platforms, again, because it is pre-approved, it's built into a workflow. As you'll see in the demo, I don't want to steal any Mark's thunder, but it is so embedded that there's total control, no lack of transparency. So organizations, as they start to use this capability, feel really confident and actually start to increase the value that they're starting to pay using this type of technology. We know in the travel and traditional corporate card transactions, the average is usually around about $300 or $400, but we're now seeing $5,000 and above being the average. And organizations that do bring a lot of those transactions onto the virtual card program can generate significant savings, because ultimately it is fully automated. They're generating payment directly to the supplier, and they're saving these transactions having to go into accounts payable and be manually managed, reconciled. It's all happening during the user activity within the platform. Now, several years ago, if anyone had said to you that someone was going to be putting, $1 million transactions on a card-based product, you certainly wouldn't believe them. But that is actually happening very regularly now. Again, it's embedded. We don't see these transactions obviously happening, in thousands, and it is a conversation that has to take place between the buyer and the supplier. but often it does merit where someone can actually, send a payment to a supplier. As Marcus will know, on the AirPlus platform, the supplier will receive the funds or they'll receive authorization automatically, so they know the funds are secured, and they'll actually receive the funds within 2 to 3 business days, rather than maybe the 30, 60 or 90 net terms that they may be on their traditional ACH or EFT type products. So that is something that we are seeing organizations start to look at card. So for those that are not totally familiar with Coupa, Coupa is a software platform, a user-centric platform that allows like-minded businesses who are looking to really transform the way they manage their business spending. And you can see here, over $4 trillion worth of spend has been placed through our platform, which means we can drive some really key insights for the organizations. And you can see there's over 2,500 of those that leverage the platform. And looking at the platform, whether it be looking to leverage insights as it is regarding to spend analysis, where they may look to try and drive some really key savings with regards to some of the spend, or it's identifying some supplier risk. Now, supplier risk, identify maybe some suppliers that they don't want to maybe leverage. However, as it relates to virtual card technology, what it allows is for the platform to identify those suppliers who are willing and able to accept virtual card. So it allows that community insights to be shared either anonymously or think of it as a social network of like-minded businesses who are looking to share information and ultimately get the most out of the platform. So with that in mind and talking about community, I'll just hand over to Marcus, who will share some of the key insights that he and his team see when they sit down with their customers and look into how they're managing their payables. Thanks, Marcus.
Yes, Darren. Perfect. Well, it's interesting you mentioned the community and learning from each other, because often that's easier said than done, right? But what we experience in our customer discussions often is that the whole purchase to pay process is a fragmented one. So there are different players in the party involved in the whole process, and often they work in silos, which means that different departments are involved, they face different challenges, and of course they try to find their own solutions for their specific challenges. And like, for example, take procurement. So procurement is always keen on having it as little maverick spend as possible, getting a grip on the supplier negotiations, of course, also getting the best prices. And when it comes to supplier negotiations, often getting the best payment terms. While this, on the other hand side, puts pressure onto accounts payables and finance, of course, because they have to run smooth processes in order to be able to deliver on those more favorable payment terms, for example. And of course, they need an overview on when to spend what, and they need to allocate costs accordingly. A delay there also might result in delays in treasury, which we have seen all over the place as well. I mean, for treasury, it's always important to have a certain overview on your cash flow, of course, and you have to have your cash flow predictions as precise as possible. And every silo tries to find their own solution for their challenges, while IT is also involved, because whenever one silo tries to implement, for example, a technical solution to solve their challenges, IT has to make sure that all those systems communicate. And of course, that makes things difficult. And if you don't have this communication and this learning from each other within the company itself, how you're supposed to have a smooth and smoothly running process in place. And without this unified process, you always have the risk of running into inefficiencies, into losing of savings, and of course, maybe reporting delays and inefficient cash management. So if you feel familiar with those challenges, you might also agree that it totally makes sense to have one integrated solution by having my provider for means of payment and my purchase to pay platform working together. And this is exactly what we do, AirPlus and Coupa. So having a look at the next slide, we also learn from each other. So AirPlus, as a specialist on means of payment, on credit card transactions processing, And with Coupa, the best-in-class procure-to-pay platform, we join forces in order to deliver you as a customer the opportunity to have this one smoothly running system to get an overview on all the spend and to give you the tools you need to have a very efficient process. And we want to use this webinar to help you discover how a single investment in business management or spend management tools can actually give you an holistic overview on spend. And this holistic overview you will need to deliver profitability, performance, and purpose. But what does this actually mean for you as a customer? And I think it's time to get down to the nitty-gritty and show you what the system is actually all about. Maybe as a brief overview, you will see on the next slide that there are 3 different types of virtual card generation you can use with the Coupa Pay platform. It's on the one hand side, the request a card option, then there's the pay on order option and the pay on invoice option. All the 3 options have one thing in common, a fully automated integration of the virtual cards of AirPlus. And I think it is time for you now to see the actual system, because I guess that's what you are all about, here about. So I'd like to hand over to Mark, and he will give you a detailed look into the system itself. Mark, please go ahead.
Perfect. Thank you, Marcus. So yeah, what I'm going to do just as whilst we're on this slide, I'm going to run through these use cases. So a request a card would be someone who's maybe out in the field, or someone who needs to request something in a short time frame. Then pay on order, so that's raising a virtual card with a purchase order, and pay an invoice. So I'll just jump into the demo system now and we'll run through these. Just sharing my screen. Can you see the platform okay? Fantastic. Okay. So here I've logged in as, say, an end user. So this could be, I don't know, a facilities manager or, say, an engineer. And I'm going to show an example. So let's say they need to purchase a light fixing, and they know someone who's down the road. They can go and source it very quickly, and so they're going to put a request through to do so. They can simply log into the platform and type in, I need a virtual card. And what this will bring up is a configurable form. And you can configure this to capture the information that you need within the request. So for this example, I'm going to put the supplier is Lights R Us, and I would like to buy, I don't know, a gold light fixing. What I'm doing whilst I'm completing this, I'm going to assign a commodity to it. And what this is actually doing in the background is it's grabbing those details from the user and assigning it correctly to how we want to capture that charge and that transaction. And in here, within the Coupa platform, you can actually set cost centers and GL codes behind this. Now, the end user won't know that, it's in the background, but it's to simplify the use of being able to grab the ability to do the transaction and raise the virtual card, but also we're thinking about the back end of when you want to reconcile that. So in this instance, I'm going to pick facilities, and we'll go to lighting. I'm going to request a certain amount, so let's just say it costs £200. As you can see, we can cover a wide range of currencies. In this instance, I'll do GBP, and I will submit that. Again, for ease of use, that's all a user needs to do to submit a request. And what's happened is that request has actually gone into my basket. So you'll notice from ease of use, it's a bit like an Amazon purchasing process. Everyone's very similar with that. So that's why we have simplified it that way, to make it very easy for the end user. So just before he submits his request, he can have a look in here. As I mentioned earlier, it's actually capturing who Sam is. So here you can see all these details. And as I scroll down, I've got the request here. I've even got the billing string or a cost center. So this is configurable again by the user. So it may be that you want the end user to be able to do this. It might be that it goes to a manager and only they have access. But what it's allowing him to do is actually see, has he put it against the right cost center? So I'll just give you an example of how you can change that. So let's just say I know that's the cost center that I'm assigned to. And very simply, and this again, if you think about the reconciliation, is simplifying that process. So I'll put that in there, done. And perfect. And also what it's done whilst I've assigned that, it's showing me any budgets that I have left. So, you know, if I know that the budget's coming to an end, I've got full transparency of that. In here is my request. And Sam, as an end user, actually has a certain amount that he's allowed to self-approve. So I've put in 200. And if I scroll further down here, you'll notice that it will approve based on the settings that have been configured for Sam's profile. What I want to show you on a requester card is if I was to say change that to 500, what can be pre-built in is a workflow approval. So now that I've gone over my budget based on the configuration, now my manager needs to be involved in that. So whilst I'm raising a request for a virtual card, using it via Coupa, there's actually a workflow approval built in, and you can configure that based on amount. You can even go down as to what commodity they're purchasing to involve other parts of the business, and I'll show that later on. For this example, I will quickly submit this through. And what this is doing is I'm creating an official requisition now, and that will actually flow through to my manager or to Mary as such. So as I submit that, I will quickly log into Mary. The great thing about the Coupa platform is Mary might not be in the office, she might be on the go, so on and so forth. So because of, again, for that speed and that ease of use, we will notify Mary. We can do that via email. She can log into the platform and she'll receive a notification. So she can actually log in. So here in her to-do list, she's been notified. She also gets notifications, as I said, via an email. And for quicker use, she could click on here and just approve. She's also able to log back in and double check what Sam's requesting. So for the instance, let's just say she hasn't seen it, she can review it now, make sure everything's okay. She can even add a note. So she could say to Sam, please, if I can type properly, please ensure to capture invoice. So she has the ability to communicate him on the request and then approve that. So once that request has gone through and it's approved, what's actually happening in the background now is it is sending out a signal to AirPlus to create that card, but at the same time, it's turning that requisition into a PO. So whilst typically if there was a purchasing card program, etc., what you tend to find is the invoice comes to the desk and then people are trying to find out where does it go, how do they reconcile, has it been pre-approved, where's the email chain. Whereas with this way, what we're doing is we're pre-approving the business spend through the workflow approvals and also ensuring that the details of the card is assigned to that request so that it's fully trackable and audible. So Mary has now approved that. I'm going to quickly flip back into Sam's profile and show you the requisition that's come through. So gold light fixing, and here, there's the requisition he raised and the purchase order. So I'm going to just quickly jump into the purchase order to show you what Sam would receive. So because it's a requester card, and Sam's going to be the person purchasing that, we've actually sent the card details to him on this occasion. So he can actually log in and view the card here. So if I quickly log in to the card portal, and he will be able to see here the card details. He'll get an element of the image so he can see everything he requires to then go and make said purchase. And if I also come back, what we also give Sam is the ability just to manage that card. So maybe it's a card that he has a budget on and he can do 2 or 3 purchases. We want to make sure that he's able to manage what's going on and see. So here, as well as the card, Coupa gives him the ability to manage and view the utilization. And anytime a transaction goes, it will list it just here below, showing him the amounts that have been processed, what transactions gone on. So that way he can always manage his limit as a user and make sure that card's working okay. He has the details of when it's valid from and to, and the amount that it's been total booked. Now, in this instance, you'll notice the amount's slightly different, and that's because we've allowed a variance for things such as taxes, etc. And that's, again, configurable with your card partner, but also within the system based on commodity if you want to allow a buffer for, say, taxes, or you want an increase of 10% on a budget, you're able to configure that. So that is a use case for a requester card. what I'll do now is I'm going to log in as a procurement user. And on this instance, I'm going to raise a virtual card on a purchase order. So again, very similar to simple user buying process. I'm going to purchase from a supplier that I do have logged in the system. So we use Dell often, and I need to purchase, say, a Dell Blade PowerEdge. So this is to go within my Dell Tower. So I'll select one of those. And again, I'm going to add that into my basket, make sure all the details are there before submitting. So it's capturing all the details that it will add into the purchase order. I can see that all that's valid. I'm just going to again make sure that's assigned to my correct budget. And add in operations. Now, in this instance, my user, Sally, actually has a very large budget threshold for demo purposes, and she can spend up to £1 million through any requisition. But it's been configured no matter how much she may be allowed to spend, because she's purchasing IT equipment, it's an asset. And so within the workflow approval, it's automatically added in an IT approver. So this is, again, from a configuration perspective, when you're looking about with who you're spending and how you're controlling and what visibility, whilst raising a virtual card on a PO, we can still make sure that the workflow approval is built in the background. So in this instance, I will submit this, and my boss, so in this instance, my CFO, can approve that. Typically, it might not be the CFO, but the CFO in this instance is Sally's boss. So we'll ask Victor to quickly approve that for her. So I will log in. And again, I really want to show the ease of use here. So if you think Victor is a very busy person, he has probably received an email and discussed this with Sally, so he's very happy with what's coming through. So I'm just going to quickly, it's taken a second. Yeah, that's filtered through. I'll just quickly refresh. Just taking a minute to get to his workload. There we go. So he's been notified, and he's fully aware of it, so he can literally click a button and approve it from that perspective. Now, again, this is flipping that requisition into a purchase order, as I mentioned before. But this time, because it's with a supplier that we have onboarded, in this instance, if I just quickly log in to that requisition, I'm going to go into the purchase order. And what will be different in this instance is we do not need to send the card details now to Sally, because the supplier is onboarded, and we're going to directly send, with the supplier's details in the system, that virtual card detail to the supplier. Now, if for any reason the supplier didn't receive those details, we do give the user the ability to resend it. And they do have the last few digits on the card, but it's masked because, again, they don't need it. It needs to go directly to the supplier. So again, whilst it's still masked, Sally does still have the ability, as Sam did, to see the utilization, what transactions are flown on there. But for this instance, just doesn't need to see the physical details of that card. So it's keeping it secure and compliant from that perspective. Now that I've actually raised that purchase order, I'm going to flip over to the supplier just to show you what the supplier will receive. So with Coupa, there's a supplier portal, and I will jump on there now. I'm just going to quickly log in as Dell. And we'll go to, so this is the portal that they will log into. If we go into their orders, and it will just bring up all the orders that we've had. And you'll see here the Dell Power Blade that I've just put through. And if we just take note of the purchase order 31862, because we've sent the card details with the purchase order, what the supplier can do, and in this instance, someone like Dell will have what we call straight-through processing, because they'll receive a lot of virtual cards within this manner. When they receive the card details from Coupa, they can capture those details, and within their system, they'll automatically process it. So if I go to purchase order payments, here you go, you can see that we've pushed that card through, and with the system that they have in place straight through processing, that's gone through and transmitted. But if I just quickly bring open that PO for you, just to show you it's the same PO that we raised from Coupa, again, same details. So the supplier can see the exact same details as we push through to them. So that is a virtual payment on a purchase order. What I will do quickly is I'm just going to log into, so I mean, Dell's a very large supplier. They would typically automate as much of that as possible. I just want to quickly log in as maybe say a smaller supplier that you might do frequent business with to show you how they could flip an invoice and how we can settle a virtual card on an invoice. So if I just quickly log out as Dell, and I will log in, we referenced an engineer, so let's just do tools. So let's just say I'm a regular tool supplier to you guys, and we will have a look at what orders have been sent through. So again, in the same way that a purchase order may be raised, you think of that process, but in this instance, a virtual card hasn't been issued yet, and we'll get to that part. But here I have, say, a large number of orders. We've now, say, completed and sent the PPE here. And what they can do literally with the click of a button is to flip that purchase order with all the details into an invoice. Again, from simplicity, the same way that we have done for the user, we make this as simple as we can for the suppliers. So here they can have pre-configured details to add in against their profile, their remit to address, where they're shipping from. So they'll save that. And that will then pre-populate into the invoice for them. And essentially all they need to do is make sure the details are correct, the amounts are correct, add in the relevant tax for VAT. I will calculate that. And that is a digital invoice created on the supplier side linked to the purchase order. So I will quickly submit that to our customer. Oh, it would also help if I put an invoice number in, so let me do that now. Okay, perfect. And as you can see, there's a little green tick there. That's actually validating that's not a duplicate invoice. So that's a really good little tool for the supplier. Everything looks perfect. Tax has been calculated, and I will submit that invoice to the customer. There we go. And you'll notice here it's stating processing. So they will always get notification when it's approved in the Coupa profile. It also shows them here. So they'll know with the customer whereabouts that invoice is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to log in as an accounts payable person on the customer side to show you how they could process that with a virtual payment. So I'm just going to quickly refresh my invoices page. And here's the invoice 12345 that I've just processed through. So now I've got my invoice in, I'm happy with it, I've approved it. What I can do is go into my payments. And the whole principle around using Coupa is that you have the ability to speed up that invoice process. You'll have full sight and control and visibility over it. So you'll actually have a lot more approved invoices ready to pay to process. You may have a scenario where a supplier requires payment earlier, or they're asking for it, or you'd want to add value to the supplier. Or I think mentioned earlier, you could use a virtual card tactically to extend, say, the payment terms of that invoice. So using that on the invoice term, but then actually the card provider has paid your supplier and you get to push out the terms of having to settle that invoice with your card provider. So if I go to invoices to pay, and here you will notice I've got my invoices. Now for an accounts payable, they can technically batch up and prepare a batch of invoices. So that's what I'm doing here. And because all of these invoices are for the same supplier, the systems recognize that. And in this instance, it's going to raise one virtual card for the total amount, but provide a line item detail against that card to the supplier saying this card is for these items. And you can separate it, but you'll see here, I'm going to use AirPlus to process that. Now within Coupa, the person that creates the batch can't be the person that approves the batch and can't be the person that processes the batch. Again, for security control, and you can configure how many people you want within that workflow, but it's just to add that layer of security. So in this instance, what I will do is just show you a batch that I prepared earlier to show you what the supplier would have received. So if I go to invoices and payment batches, and here's a payment batch that I processed. So if I just log into this to show, so what's happened now is I've paid more than one supplier. So I've got Dell USA, I've got the Toolstation one that we were just showing, and I've processed my AirPlus virtual card and pushed this through. So right now what's happened is the virtual card would have been issued to the supplier for them to process, and it's showing me that payment's in progress. And then finally, I'll just quickly show you what the smaller supplier will see, being that they won't have straight through processing. So here we go. There's this smaller invoice that I had processed already in my previous batch. And I can literally go on to my payments, invoice payments, and here's what's being sent to the supplier already. And they can log into here. So now they've received the card details on that invoice, allowing them to then manually process or upload it within they may have a portal they can upload their virtual cards and process it that way. But the supplier has now received on the invoice those card details to transact against. And that is a virtual card on an invoice. And if I may quickly, just want to finalize one more piece. If I go back to the accounts payable, just want to show you the sort of awesome, the flexibility of using Coupa and the automation that you can get by standardizing sort of those three use cases through the Coupa platform. But essentially what we do is we give you a summary of all the payments that you're processing. So it could be your backs, your virtual cards, your PO payments, invoice payments. But if you're using, say, a virtual card program for a specific, maybe your tail end spend or maybe a specific commodity, Coupa gives you insight to how you're tracking, how many transactions are going through on your virtual card program, so that you've got insight to how you're progressing that. Additionally to that, we digest your statements. So we have a direct connection with AirPlus, and they can send us their statement with the amounts totaled. And every time you transact on your virtual card, again, we will get a daily update of the transactions that are going through. But what's really key to know is with the card number being raised against that rec, we're able to link it against a purchase order, the amount, the supply that you used, and the cost center or billing string. So as that's processing in the background and we've received the statement, we're able to auto reconcile that into Coupa for you and then give you a ready to upload file back into your ERP. So that's auto being reconciled in the Coupa platform. And additionally to that, if you're a large organization raising lots of cards, we can give you insight to the transactions that are going through the system and the amount. So you can see what cards are still active, what cards still have balances, so that you've got full insight and control of your card platform. So yeah, any questions? I hope you've enjoyed that. But again, if you do have any questions, let us know.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Mark. Super insightful, and it's great to see, you know, as we touched on earlier on in the session, you know, around the sort of user centricity of the platform, where they can go in, they can do what needs to get done, they can raise their requisitions, they can raise their purchase orders, get the approval they need, without necessarily having to overthink. And it goes back to your point earlier around that kind of Amazon experience. We're all used to going in, selecting what we want to purchase, you know, making the payment. It all happens seamlessly in the background, and that's clearly what we're looking to bring in partnership with the integration that we have with AirPlus. And one other key thing that you touched on as well, and it's great that we had the opportunity to see the Coupa supplier portal, being that Coupa as a business spend management certainly focused on the buying community that we have. We saw earlier that, you know, those payments are made by those 2,500 or so buyers to over 8 million suppliers. Now, many of those suppliers, as you've seen, can actually interact with the platform to give them that window into the invoices or purchase orders that they're receiving from those buying organizations. And obviously they may have multiple organizations that happen to be using the Coupa platform. So they can manage multiple different payment channels and buying channels, all within the one Coupa supplier portal, which is very important. When it relates to virtual card, we have talked about the buyer benefits of leveraging virtual cards within the platform, being that it's fully automated, the reconciliation, the extension of DPO, etc. But there are multiple benefits. We've touched on a couple that suppliers can actually experiencing by putting their hand up and willing to accept the virtual card. Many of the larger suppliers, as Mark touched on, have built in, automated AR to really process everything in the background in that straight-through processing environment. But Coupa also has partnerships with some straight-through processing partners, the likes of Stripe, Billtrust, and Boost, that allow suppliers to actually, work with these parties and fully automate at least the virtual card processing element of that straight-through processing piece. So there are areas where, you as a buyer can work with ourselves and AirPlus, and we can then work from a supplier enablement perspective to engage with those suppliers to educate them on the benefits and where required, where there may be, significant virtual card volume that could be sent to them. Then we obviously want to make sure they have a great experience and bring that straight through processing element to it. Because the last thing we want to do is, get the supplier onto taking virtual card, and then very quickly, we talked about that community effect earlier. All of a sudden, everyone can see that supplier accepts card, and maybe lots of suppliers start to send virtual cards to them, and it kind of breaks their AR processing department because they're now getting too many of these virtual cards to process. So we try and lifecycle manage that to make sure that we give them the capabilities that they would need to allow those virtual cards to continue. And I touched on earlier around the fact that, cost of capital is up, inflation is up. So, accepting a virtual card can be a really cost-effective way of speeding up and reducing days sale outstanding for those suppliers. Now, I know we did have one original question that came through, Mark, when you were actually doing your session, and it probably fits in quite well when you were talking about the commodities. There was a question here: what types of transactions are recommended for V-card payments? Would reoccurring telecom expenses be something that can be managed via virtual card? What's your experience with that regarding whether it be raising, obviously, a PO, obviously having that budget, those types of, what's your view on that one? And you're on mute again, mate.
I love the mute button. No, it's a great question, and it really comes down. So there's two ways to answer this. One is it comes down to your strategy, which I'll come back to. But the other piece is you can set up virtual cards so that you can have reoccurring transactions. It comes down to how much exposure do you want to create on that card, and how long do you want to manage it, like time frequency. So it might be a budget over a week, a budget over a month. The question is, would you want a budget over a year? Like, would you want to review that in the interim? But we also, in the same way that I showed you a card on PO, what we can do is something called a supplier card. So it's where you send the card details to the supplier, but essentially that virtual card is attached to, say, your account, if you have an account with them. And what they can do is either charge against it multiple times with invoices. Typically what we would see is they would bulk those invoices to the end of the month and charge at the end of the month. So it comes down to how you want to manage the exposure of that budget being open and the relationship with that particular supplier. But what I would say, if you think of three use cases, is what types of transactions really comes down to how you want to maximize your virtual card program. So do you want to do it, say, for tail end spend and try and reduce the onboarding of suppliers, so then you'll have lots of one-time use cards? Is it a case of there's 2 or 3 suppliers that you maybe want to push out your payment terms with, so you specifically select that supplier because there's a mutual benefit for the both of you, not because of the particular commodity, but from a financial perspective of you paying them sooner, but extending your terms? My answer to it: why not both? Why not all 3 use cases? It comes down to how obviously what limit you have with your card program and how you want to maximize it. But you could certainly, if it drives value for you and your supplier, then I would look at that as a good commodity to attack.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Mark. We've got a great question from Philip, who asked a question around B2B acceptance, especially in Europe, where I touched on earlier that certainly in the US, virtual cards have been prevalent for a long time. But Mark being the Marcus, that myself and Marcus being based in Europe, we spend a lot of our time engaging around the growth of virtual cards. Marcus, what do you see when you're speaking with the organizations in terms of the engagement with the smaller suppliers that may not have experience of accepting virtual card before? What's the type of conversation that happens there, and what do those suppliers ultimately need to do to work with the buyers who want to pay them using virtual card?
Well, that's basically a great question, and of course, I think we are all aware that Central Europe is not the typical credit card market as it might be in the US. But Darren, you've already answered this question on your last slide, I guess. There are other partners which we all work together when it comes to straight-through processing, making sure that the corresponding supplier actually is capable of accepting a credit card as a means of payment. What we also can offer is that we have a look at your accounts payables files to make a kind of analysis on what kind or which of your suppliers are actually currently capable of accepting cards, which are likely to accept cards, which do actually accept cards. And then, of course, we go into discussions with the suppliers. And when it comes to the supplier discussions, it's all about a secured means of payment, a secured settlement of their invoices. And that's basically the reason why suppliers often accept credit cards. And of course, the fact that the settlement, as you already mentioned, Darren, the settlement usually comes in within 2 or 3 working days, which means that the supplier usually gets paid earlier. And there's a reason why suppliers offer early payment discounts to their customers, because they are more than happy to receive payments way earlier than at the end of pre-negotiated payment terms.
Yeah, fantastic, Marcus. Great points. And that's the key thing as well, as part of any implementation. So any client who does decide to implement AirPlus virtual cards within Coupa, we have teams of people who work through that supplier enablement. So it is often either a conversation with the suppliers directly, or actually it is just highlighting those suppliers who have already said, within the platform, within the Coupa supplier portal, they've updated their preferences to say, look, you don't need to contact me. I already am aware of the platform. I'm aware of virtual cards, and I'm more than willing to accept them. And that's what we do in terms of supporting our buying customers, directing virtual cards to those suppliers who they know they can spend. Now, the long tail for one-off suppliers, again, is still a conversation to say, are they actually willing and even able to process that virtual card when they do receive it? But having solutions that I've touched on, like Stripe, for example, where very easily, very quickly, in an online environment, those suppliers could, connect themselves to a Stripe account and have that virtual card processed directly into their bank account. That's just one example. I mentioned a couple of other partners we're working with at the moment. And from a Coupa Pay more broadly perspective, we are building out the ecosystem. So we do have, new acquiring partners coming on all the time, especially in Europe, where it is, a relatively newer market. And obviously, as we expand into some other emerging markets, like into Asia and LATAM, etc. as well. So there will be more names added to that list to sort of solve that scenario where suppliers might not be able to accept. I'm just going to see if we have any other questions that have come through. Okay, so we've got one here that's talking about the sending of the virtual card. So if we want to send a virtual card to a supplier so that they can keep using that same virtual card number, is there a limitation on how long that card can remain active with that supplier? Fantastic question. That is actually flexible. And I don't know, Mark, if you want to take this from a user perspective, but just quickly, that is something that it can be managed within the platform and can be variable, both in terms of the expiry date that's set, so how long that card is valid for, and then the number of transactions that you want to permit to be charged against that card. Anything else, Mark, in terms of the user experience, in terms of how they're creating those cards, whether it be an extended request a card or potentially even a ghost card? I know we haven't gone into too much detail on ghost card functionality, but anything you'd like to share there?
Yeah, it literally is very configurable. So you'll have a set agreement with your card provider, and I'm just going to use a basic example. You might have a certain limit that you allow. Typically, you can set a monthly limit, a transactional limit, and you'll have a, say, basic 30-day open window. With our direct connections from the platform with AirPlus, you can actually configure that. So it might be that you have particular commodities where you'll only allow the card to be active, say, for 1 or 2 days for a specific amount. So you've got that tight control. It might be a use case that I've seen is where they will create an open budget amount for, it was Google AdWords, and they knew they were going to charge and charge and charge and charge and charge, but the amount was open for a set, I think it was for 3 months for that, but that was the budget for that marketing campaign. So it really is very flexible and configurable depending on how you want to use it. And what I would say is it's not set one way for one specific commodity and you have to use that across the board. You can really flex within the program how you want to use that card for that particular commodity or for that particular purchase. So again, you have that flexibility and control.
Yeah, but as you touched on earlier, Mark, in terms of a reconciliation perspective, each individual transaction is automatically appended back to that virtual card. So it allows you to have full visibility of all those transactions from that particular supplier, as well as managing budgets as well. And when the budget obviously gets close to, say, 80% or so, it gives you the option then to create another virtual card that can be handed over. So it allows you that transition time between the two cards that might be working in tandem with that said supplier. Fantastic. Now we've got an interesting question here. Oh, sorry, Marcus.
Just briefly as an addition to that, because I also think that's a very good question. Our cards that are being generated via this API are valid up to 1 year the most. But the reason for that especially is that you can keep track of your subscriptions. I mean, just recently I had a customer call, for example, where there was a transaction on a credit card that was stored with a certain supplier for a yearly subscription that wasn't needed anymore. So they just didn't have this transparency to focus on, okay, do I actually need this? Do they still have my means of payment in place? And then, of course, they were able to charge it. And with this limitation, you have the opportunity to gain this transparency. And this is also what we see with our customers. They often use this. I mean, Mark already mentioned Google AdWords, for example. They use it to store this means of payment, especially when you do not actually know when the supplier is going to charge the card. Like Google AdWords, charging per clicks. It's always easier to have a secure means of payment there that actually works, because you do not know when the transaction actually kicks in. Right?
Yeah, and as you say, it makes it certainly more prevalent and more up to date if it's within a 12-month period, so people can manage that. And you know, if the subscription is still due to be paid, then very quickly, as you've seen from the demonstration from Mark, very quickly can log into the system and generate a new card to be you know, sent to the supplier or provided to the supplier. So fantastic, thanks for that extra detail, Marcus. Another question now, this might be for you as well, Marcus, around, you know, can you use virtual cards to pay for events at restaurants?
Very, very good questions from the audience. I'm quite impressed. Actually, there's a kind of a, I don't want to call it bottleneck because that sounds so negative. As AirPlus, we have to have a separation between our virtual cards for business travel management spend and our virtual cards for procurement spend. With this integration, we talk about our virtual cards procurement, which means that they are just applicable in the merchant category codes of procurement. So coming back to the question, with an event, the cards could work. With a restaurant, the cards might not work. It always depends on the merchant category code, so the identifier of the specific supplier, which he or she has within the MasterCard network. So I think as an all-over answer, for all the business-related travel spend, our virtual cards classic are applicable, and all procurement-related spend, our virtual cards procurement, and especially the ones being integrated into Coupa Pay, are applicable.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and it's really about, us again, talking about that form factor earlier, when we think of walking plastic being digitized into mobile devices with the likes of Google and Apple Pay, versus where it's actually, as I said, that more general procurement, where it's a virtual token that's being used to provide that information to the supplier. But we are seeing really a convergence of that taking place as we speak, where, you know, these virtual cards are being provisioned into digital wallets. So it's something that's not necessarily prevalent or available across the board at the moment, but it's something that over the coming months and years we expect to be standardized across both procurement and business travel and expenses. We've got another question here. Just before we finish up, I'm conscious that we've only got a couple of minutes left. When do you expect to have API for receipts attached to charges? Again, this really feels more like a, the business travel and expense scenario where those individual receipts at the time of purchase. So again, as we see virtual cards move more and more into that digital wallet, Apple and Google Pay environment, those receipts will then be picked up and be passed into platforms like Coupa on the travel and expense side. So, but certainly as you've seen through the demonstration from Mark, where invoices are being uploaded, receipts are being attached, that's all configurable and managed within the platform, and users and finance can have full visibility of all of those. So look, we know we've only got a few seconds left. So look, I'd like to just say thanks so much for Marcus and Mark for joining me and supporting me on this session today, as well as Krista for managing everything behind the scenes. Very, very much appreciated. And obviously the attendees, thank you very much for spending 60 minutes with us. We hope you've learned a lot. Obviously seeing the demo, fantastic. You will be able to see the recording, as we mentioned. And for those that have hung on till the dying minutes, you'll also receive your gift card voucher for a coffee in Danish. So please enjoy that. Thank you very much. And we look forward to staying connected. Please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.